Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back to another installment of the Hen House at Home. I'm Toby Harper.
And I'm Monica Fernandez.
And thank you so much for joining us to celebrate our fall 2021 authors and their incredible books. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that the land that Monica and I are broadcasting from is the occupied and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tonga, and Kizh people. Tonight's event features two astounding Red Hen poets, so we wanted to share an equally incredible poetry collection recently released by an Indigenous writer. Eyes Bottled Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers by Jake Skeets was named a Best Poetry Book of 2019 by Electric Literature, Entropy Mag, and Auburn Avenue, and a Best Queer Book of 2019 by BuzzFeed Books and Bookmarks. From our friends at Milkweed, this is a debut collection of poems by a dazzling geologist of queer eras. Rooted in Navajo history and thought, these poems show what has been brewing in an often forgotten part of the American literary landscape.
That sounds so incredible. We're dropping the bookshop.org link in the comments below. Pick up your copy now.
Yeah, please do. We are so excited to welcome Nicole, Stellon O'Donnell, and M. Soledad Caballero to tonight's event. Monica will be moderating the discussion, so take it away, Monica.
Thanks, Toby. It was so interesting to read these collections. Actually, where did I put them? I have them right here. So interesting to read these collections of these incredible poets and seeing where they came together and where they diverged. I can't wait to get into our conversation, so let's welcome them to the screen. Nicole and Soledad, I will bring you up. Hello. Hi, welcome. So we'll start off with some reading so you can all get a taste of the incredible poems living in these collections. Nicole, we'll have you go first.
Okay, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Red Hen, for setting this up and for getting us on screen today and for getting me to hang out with Soledad a little bit. We've had a great time talking about this. So I'm just going to read some poems from Everything Never Comes Your Way. Advice to the young right fielder. Hold the glove to your face, cupping your chin. Peek through the holes and the world will telescope out. See your mother sitting in the stands. See the pitcher swoop her fast arm. You have been put here because you are good at being wrong. Breathe wrong well. Catalog the dandelions, the foul lines, chalky trace, the cloud that rises from first base. Stand unready in the green nothing you have been allotted. Close your eyes. Don't worry. Everything never comes your way. And the next one is called By Proxy. There's a little epigraph from something people say to me or have said to me a lot. By proxy, I don't know how you're doing this. The well-meaning people who don't know what to say. There is no not doing this. My child is that child, another bald child. No eyelashes, no eyebrows. We all know what that means. You know, I know. It means the worst thing a parent can imagine. Look at the pictures online. One kid trails an IV, another sits in a bed visiting with a football player. A close-up, a small hand crowned with a hospital bracelet holds an adult's hand. I would have volunteered, held the pain in my body like I held her in my body before she was born. Pain might have squirmed and turned like she did at 8 months, making me scared she'd be breech. I have room for more scars. Please, a diagonal slash across my abdomen, the white line, triangle, the numb triangle beneath the white line. I have space. Give me a port scar, a bubble. Sorry. A bubble under my collarbone, the lung biopsy scar, a chip beneath my shoulder blade. If the only way out is through, then pull me all the way through, like a needle. Let what little I am allowed to offer be a thread, stitching this cut through our lives back together. And you, dear one, you only say you don't know how I am doing this because you believe your relief over not being me will protect you from being me someday. And me, I have imagined worse things. I can't stop imagining worse things. That's how I'm doing this. This one's called The Word I Will Not Use, about the wolf. I saw the alpha female walk down the road with a sheep leg in her mouth. I will not pretend we were not in the car, even though in the picture you can't tell we were in the white Subaru on the dirt road. I saw the alpha female walk down the road, past a line of cars, past hand after hand holding phones out of the windows. I will not pretend I knew what was in her mouth. I thought it was ptarmigan, forgetting that in September the ptarmigan would not be white. My eyes knew flesh, even torn despite bald spots, hide hanging, which I took for feathers, collared, tracked, plotted in bits and numbers, statistically analyzed, even her scat gathered in plastic bags and turned over for scrutiny, her tracks filled with plaster, preserved in the visitor center, shouting, "Please touch me." She was never alone. Not the kind of alone we imagine. And I was as unalone too. I watched the wolf while I was wearing a seatbelt in the passenger seat, casual. She padded beside the still cars on the road in front of the mountain. September, bright blue and hot. We sat until she was not in our rear view. Later, the ranger told us she came to her den in the tundra and the pups ran out and ate, howling small howls in celebration while the cars, stilled and shut off, sat rock-like in the road. She didn't care. She didn't look toward the cars. She didn't feel our need for her to be real as the sunlight pounding through our windshields, as real as the ragged tooth of the big mountain so clear in front of us. That was the road we were on. She was a wolf, a park wolf, important wolf, alpha wolf. And I remember another alpha female trapped just outside the park boundary a few years before, a toklat wolf, important wolf, the last of a particular beautiful, like the crisp September sun before the mute dark of winter. I will not use the word mourn. None of us who sat and watched deserves it. And I wanted to read this one because employment is so on everyone's mind these days. So this is called Day Job. Assume for the sake of argument that desperation hasn't seeped into Sunday night, swallowing dinner and the table, the round hopperesque light in which your wife, in her best 1950s cone bra, raises the fork to her mouth, and that your own sadness doesn't sit in the chair next to you, invisible, but for a slight difference in the brush stroke, a notch shadow on the wall that can't be seen in the gallery, but that the viewer senses anyway. Let's assume the world isn't intense pastel infused with grit and fluorescence, and that as you crease this week's pay stub into your palm, you don't think of the word stub as the secret word for your heart. And I lost my timer, but I think I have time for 2 short more. Is that okay? Are we good? We're good? Okay. So this is called The Previously Unmentioned Father. She told the children the cat went to Florida to visit his father, but she had found him in the neighbor's yard, one leg sticking out from under the shade-loving hostas. The not-so-shade-loving cat shouldn't have been there. So when she scooped his body up, limp like a bunched orange beach towel, she wondered what she would say. What was a better place? How to introduce heaven to kids who had been to Mass once when their great-grandmother died. And then the oldest asked, pointing at the priest, Is that God? 3 days later, when the kids noticed the cat still hadn't shown, she brought up Florida, and they seemed to buy it. The previously unmentioned father, the sun, and the sandy beach. And this will be my last one. It has an epigraph from Luke. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? It's called Mothering Martha and Mary. Daughters are like that, bickering. One has done something. The other did it first. One steals the other's pants and swings them above her head. The other screeches. One demolishes the bedroom while the other weeps in the top bunk. The tears have something to do with silly putty. One makes faces naked in the bathroom mirror to prevent the other from brushing her teeth. One punches the other in the face while she is sitting on the toilet. Crying, they tattle. Shouting, they tattle. Jesus Christ, I say, knock it off. Jesus Christ, I say, you were wrong. I saw Mary sitting there at your feet, blinking her lashes, baiting her sister, and you let her get away with it. Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. Soledad, I am happy to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you. I loved hearing your poems, Nicole. It was so great. Okay, my first poem is called Flight Plan. My father challenged the mystery of flying. A mathematician, he lived rooted in the certainty of Bernoulli and Newton. He trusted fast-moving air at lower pressure, believed in the curvature of wings, their slight tilt down to the angle of attack. It is 5,666 miles from Santiago, Chile to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. 31, 3 children, no English. My mother whispered her sadness to no one. She swallowed every heartbeat, stifled all sorrow. It was March. It was 1980. The coup was still a bright blue wound. The plane pulsed through clouds, miles, memories. After hours, after questions, after all stories ended, she promised angels, one on each wing lifting the taut, cold steel body. A plane under divine command to stay in the sky. We would land in oil and cattle country where my father waited. It worked, this myth of love, the comfort of a father holding up a burning cylinder, a mystery of girlish faith. I closed my eyes and slept. The plane crossed the South, the Midwest, landed in an arid yellow prairie of steer ranches, dirt, casinos. In a new world of upside down seasons, January became winter. Decades pass and I carry rosary beads. No certainty with any sky. No angels, no fathers now. I left cowboy and cattle country. I have studied my own physics. I have learned my own plane myths, but every takeoff is still a new standoff with gravity. I am 7, looking through oval windows, waiting for divine command. If you know me at all, you know I hate flying. So like that's just a sort of basic, horrible memory forever. The next one is called The Order of Things. As with all things now, I want order. I want to take the strings of chaos, the lonely stamp, the leftover paper, the bruised, too ripe peach, the thick, gray flyaway hairs and stack them. Stack them in a row, put them in a box. Label each part, taking time to make sure I note the skin of the peach, the tangle wire of the hair, the missing colors on the faded stamp. I want to make them whole again, full and not dead or dying. Order is a place of rest and stopping. Long ago, I said I wanted to be light, the way silk feels light against the heat of the sun. I imagined floating in this world, always sure of how beautiful the mess would be. But I have learned cells can grow to wild proportions along the inside pulsing parts of the body, carving their path with serrated blades along muscle tissue, the pink inside of the breast, under the arm reaching for the small jellyfish glands. This was more than a mess. Those cells, an aching mouth of angst and blood, urgent for the rest of it, the rest of me. And I alone in this jungle of living, a stumbling wanderer. This is not the story I wanted. Okay, just two more. This poem is called Bird Girl. Half her life, she has been gone in silence, in the darkness. Who took her? Who disappeared, this girl, willowy and sweet? A black bird of a girl with dark liquid eyes, smoke mouth, a smile like a song, a secret, a smile like leaves, like light through the leaves of a tree. This bird girl, laughing girl, with no freckles, no moles, just a scar, the scar on her nose, a sliver of a scar, this girl with eyes like rain, silver eyes, silver scar. This bird of a girl with morning ahead of her that day and work and coffee, cream and sugar and coffee, the sun warm on her skin, this bright bird girl of a girl leaving home for work, for school, for life. This bird girl who walked from the mall to the beach, to the sunset, to the rocks, after work, after school, after home, she walked and left no prints, no scratches, no blood, no books, no pictures, no phone, just the shadow of herself. Bird girl, who took you, bird girl? Who made you so small we could not find you with any words or guns or people or stories or secrets or love? Who made you so small? And my final poem is for my husband, who tells me to chill all the time. When you go out to walk the dog, you call me at 10:14 p.m. I think he has been kidnapped or shot, or maybe it is aliens or wild dogs. Someone is dead, or he lost his shoe in a sinkhole. The dog is rabid, or maybe the dog is the dead one. Come outside, you laugh. You are standing on the lawn holding a bag of shit and the dog leash. You say, look at the moon. And I do.
I love that. It was so great. All right. Thank you both so much. This was wonderful. I loved hearing your collections. And I love hearing poets read from their collections, because when you read a poetry book, by yourself or something, I feel like I never get the full effect of what the poet is trying to kind of convey. And so when I hear them read it with the emphasis that they intend and the the intonation and all of that stuff. It hits me so much more. So I always love kind of attending poetry readings and listening to poets read. So thank you guys so much for that. We are going to go into our little discussion portion. So I would like to start off a little bit broad and big picture, and then we can zero in on more specifics for each of your collections. I always love asking poets about form. If anyone has watched a few of our Hen House poetry events, they'll see that I tend to ask this question a lot, but it's because the answer is always different depending on who you ask. So I wonder, how do you decide what a poem looks like? And how do you decide where a poem will go in a larger collection? So it's kind of a two-part question. Both of you have prose poems in your collections, but you also divide your collections into separate sections. Can you tell us about your thought process for how poems and collections come together for you? Let's start with Soledad.
Okay. Thank you for that great question. And I've been thinking about it ever since you sort of have asked us. And here's what I'm going to confess. This is my first collection of poetry. So it was kind of like, I don't know, right? So I started writing and I started kind of writing a lot. And I realized as I was halfway through it that there may be some thematics, but it wasn't going to be a collection I could tell that was going to have one singular thread, right? Or one kind of like arc. I sort of saw them as, so I talk about immigration, or I talk about being sick with cancer, or I talk about memories that I have. And I have some sort of silly poems like about my husband or my dog. And so what I wanted to do was find ways for those threads to work together. And for me, that ended up being kind of in a strange way, like memory. So I sort of thought the thread, if there is one, is how we stitch ourselves together. And we restitch ourselves together every time we think about something in a different way. So in terms of the arc, I think there's like several arcs, right? Which is kind of what I was trying to capture with the sort of divisions. Yeah. I also think of it as breath. Like I kind of wanted like you to get through a collection, or the reader to get through a collection, or a piece of it and go, okay, like I could stop here if I wanted to pause, right? Or I could think of these kind of as grouped. I must confess, this is one of the hardest things for me this was one of the hardest parts. Like the writing, the revising, like wasn't, I mean, it was hard, but it was like, okay, I know this terrain. But then thinking of it as an arc, I think that was the place that I thought I need breath, I need places to stop, and I don't want to write about only one thing. And so that was sort of my process. I don't know, Nicole, what do you think?
No, that's perfect. And I think, this is hard. This is really hard thinking.
Yeah.
And to do. And I once had a student describe it as deep brain thinking. He had to think so hard his legs hurt, he told me. And I think ordering a poetry book is like that. And for me, this is my third collection. And I have a problem. And my problem is I really want to write a whole book on a theme. So my first book was actually a novel and poems based on historical research. And that's with Red Hen. It's Steam Laundry. And when a friend asked me out, he said, so wait a minute, you gave yourself the problems of a nonfiction writer, a novelist, and a poet? And I was like, yeah, I did give myself those problems. So my second collection, and that's where I actually have a poem, I don't think it hasn't made it into a collection, but it's called Breaking Up with Stanza. And it's about how I now write only bricks of prose. And so I started writing bricks, and then those became a sequence that suddenly was thematic. It all dealt with education, and that became my second book. So this book was really hard for me because I had three strands. I had kind of memoir, I had my philosophical arguments that I like to make, and then I had a whole fight with nature writing. And so that's how it shook out in the end. But it took me a lot of reordering to find those threads. And a really good reader and friend named Sarah, who I dedicated the book to, is a person who would show up at my house with like the poems stacked in two different orders and go, try this. And then we'd talk about it. but it's really hard work. And especially when, like me, you become attached to this thematic. The first book was basically chronological. I could put it in order. I was telling a story. So this was really challenging. But yeah, finding some threads, kind of kept me going.
This wasn't in the list of questions that I sent you, but I'm just curious. Do you, when you write a poem, do you create a separate Word document for each poem, or do you have like thread documents?
Do you mean like, huh?
Like, how do you save it?
Like not like. Oh, are you saying like, do we add to drafts with different poems?
Well, because when I write prose, so obviously I just kind of write kind of chronologically, but like I jump around from parts of what I'm writing, but they're all in the same document, so I don't split it by chapters or whatever. So I've always kind of wondered, like, do poets like write a poem and save it in its own document, and then when it comes time to try and come up with a collection, gather all those documents and like look at them and see, or do they kind of just write everything in like one bulk document?
No.
It seems like you write like separate poems.
Because I didn't really know I was in a book until I was like halfway through writing some stuff. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'm not just randomly writing poems, right? But for me, and probably this is an issue, right? Of why my ordering is like an issue. But like, I would write a poem and save it. And then every time I do something to it, I like save the different draft and like draft, date, whatever, right? So then it becomes like a folder situation. It's a banana system. Let me just be clear. I don't recommend this system. But I was so like obsessed with making sure I wasn't missing something from before. And then sometimes I cut and paste, like, and I call it stuff I didn't use from poem X, right?
I love that. That's so great. I
don't know. Nicole, I'm sure you're much more organized than I am.
Well, I'm not organized, and I'm a fits and bursts writer. I'm not a daily writer. But this is a great question because I do both. Sometimes I just write a poem. I do not save my drafts. I Google Doc over it. So I guess I could go back and look if I wanted. I do save scraps, but my method, I call it, I taught a little class on it for this thing called sequences and patterns. And I love poems that are sequences. So actually, advice to the young right fielder that I read today. I had one document that every poem was me giving advice to people who were myself, because I was the right fielder, like I failed at baseball. So, but then what happens is I'll think, this is a sequence. This could be a book. And guess what? One poem made it in this book. But I got a lot of writing exercises out of that. I had a series of poems that were job descriptions for articles of clothing. None of those have made it anywhere yet. But I can jump back into the document on what Camille Dungy kind of calls a blank page day, where you're like confronted with the vastness of your task and you have nothing before you. Sometimes I jump into my sequences to light a fire under myself. And so I think I do actually do that, Monica. I think I have these documents and then I'll pull the poems out, but not always. Yeah. They come separately too.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It's a good question. And like I have a draft of a second book and I did it very differently. Now they're all in one document. As I was like, I think this is a book. I'm just going to start putting them in there.
That's so interesting.
But it was a learning moment.
All right, back to the scripted questions. Yeah. As I was reading your collections, I noticed something really interesting. Soledad, your poems are really visceral. They're full of visual descriptions and painted pictures of your words. But Nicole, your poems are a bit quieter, no less powerful, of course, but they're more internal and introspective. And it got me thinking about macrocosms and microcosms, and how you're both, as all poets are, just trying to make sense of the world, your lives, and your histories through this literary art. I wonder, as you write your poems, do you find that you're writing more to try and make sense of life for yourself? Or do you think you might be trying to impart wisdoms to your readers, like a conversation? Or do you think you do both? Let's start with Nicole this time.
I would say both, but of course, right? This book is more introspective. It's very much me thinking through arguments kind of with myself. So when I'm writing it, I'm thinking of myself, but my process is to read everything aloud. In fact, like when we were in the editing phase, I read this entire book aloud to myself multiple times. Just in this very office, I stood and I was reading it aloud because I needed to hear it. So I think there is a sense of audience for me, but I think that audience might be the audience I'm actually literally speaking to in an event or but then when I'm writing the poem, the audience is myself. So certainly the advice to the young right fielder is me. Certainly, I am that person. I am the person receiving. I am the person thinking through all these things. I have a poem in here called Necessary Premises, and I seem to be making an argument about the assumptions we make, but really it's about the assumptions I make. So it's both. So I notice in part of my process, maybe I'm speaking to other people. I don't know if I'm, what was the phrase you used? Like, I don't think I'm imparting wisdom, but I'm trying to communicate to them. But the wisdom I'm trying to impart is to myself.
Yeah, I really agree with Nicole. Like to be honest, I have had moments of panicked moments. I was like, oh my God, other people are going to read this book now. Like it was a real moment because my interlocutor when I'm writing is kind of some version of myself, right? And I'm like having this kind of bidirectional, and I'm trying to work usually it's work something out that's kind of just marinated for a really long time. Or so I have a poem like What You Are Doing Is Living. And I remember thinking about writing that poem. And it's in second person, right? It's you. You don't think about this. You don't think about that. And it's about the experience of realizing for me when I was going through chemo, like you're still alive. Like even though this is horrible, right? Like stuff is happening and actually growing in your own body, right? So for me, that's the first step. And I'll be honest, I've had moments where I thought other people are going to read this in a way that I won't have access to sort of the frame. And, I write for academic audiences all the time. I have tons of like scholarly articles. And for some reason that was not as terrifying, right? At all. As like, because of course the I is a fiction and then also not a fiction, right? In a collection. Is it wisdom? I mean, I don't think so. Like it's like observations that I hope might make a momentary situation feel like there's a connection. I think I'm writing for connection.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I love that. I know that you two have questions for each other. So Soledad, how about you go first?
Cool. Thank you, Monica. Okay. So this was such a great experience for, I think, both of us, but for me, because we were reading each other's work in relation to our own, right? So we spent some time thinking about what the connections were, and there were so many interesting connections. So when we read each other's books, serendipitously, we noticed that one of the threads was the thread of illness, specifically cancer. In my case, my own cancer, in Nicole's case, the cancer of her daughter. And we chose to make this an adjacent thread and like not a central thread. So I wonder, Nicole, if you want to speak to that decision of structuring illness that way and the reasons for that decision.
Well, and for both of us, I don't think either one of us has a section in our book about it. There's just poems mixed into the other sections occasionally. So it's really interesting. It's like extra adjacent. Like there's just a few poems here and there. And I feel like there are some subjects that come with so much emotional shorthand and baggage. You can see it different ways. And cancer is really one of them. And in that poem I read, after my daughter was sick, watching Katy Perry's video Fireworks, I'm like, yeah, of course you went for the cancer kid, Katy. Nice shorthand for that. But it's so interesting how, for me, I started resisting that shorthand. Like, how do I write about another human being who is her own person, who is 14 years old now, who has her own perspective. It's her illness. It wasn't mine. And that's kind of why in the first poem in this, I say, like, one of the talking to myself is, well, if you're going to write poems about cancer, you better write them soon. Because she's, you know, she's going to be a teenager, or she's going to have her own perspective. And so I feel like cancer is very weighty, of course, but it comes with a shorthand, and people make a lot of assumptions. And I resisted succumbing to that in my writing. And I know how you felt, Soledad. How did you feel? Like, what was that?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I was 42 when I got diagnosed, and that felt young to me in a way, even though I was not a child kind of dealing with that. And yeah, right. Like there's so many, what I wanted to resist was the sort of narratives of like fighting and triumphing, and like this and I think that's so true, right, in your poems too, Nicole, in this book, right? Because cancer is many things, but what it is not is a war or a battle or like, you know, like, or something that you win or don't win, right? And so that for me was really important, even though I know for many people that narrative of triumph and fight is very important. And so I don't want to diminish that. The other thing that was really just, I wanted it to be something. So I kept thinking, my doctors were really good, and they were just like, cancer wants to grow. And I thought that was, for some reason, I know that's like an obvious thing, but like, it just kept sticking with me. Like, what this cancer wants to do is live. It's life, even though it's also super deadly. And that was what I was more interested in. And so I didn't want to have like a cancer book or a cancer section. But I also, poetry writing during that year, especially in the year after when I was recovering, it became a way for me to negotiate kind of pretty primal things. And that I couldn't not write about it, I guess, if I was thinking about the sort of experiential, but I didn't want it to be the driver of anything. And I'm like, I Was a Bell is the titular poem of my collection, and it is the kind of most intimate, personal poem about kind of thinking about the future and children and not having children in the context of cancer. But that was something that was percolating, not just because of cancer, right? So yeah, I think we had really good discussions about like, yeah, this triumph cancer stuff, like forget it, you know?
It's funny. I mean, I'll just interject a little bit. Cancer has touched all of us in some way. I'm actually also a survivor. And so I can absolutely connect with your mentality, Soledad, of like when I was recovering and everybody was telling me like, oh, you're so brave and you're so strong. And I was just like, I felt like such a fraud because I hadn't done anything that I felt was heroic in any way. I literally just lived through it. And so it's a weird kind of space to be in because people like admire your strength, but you're like, but I just didn't feel like I was strong at all. So I love that connection. And I just found that it's so weird that all three of us kind of have that kind of connection to cancer. And Nicole, as the mother of a cancer survivor, like your poems about cancer, seeing it from your perspective through like to your daughter, like made me think about how my mother was seeing it, you know, when it came to me. And I was diagnosed when I was 21. So I was an adult, obviously, but like my mom stayed with me like overnight at the hospital during my treatments and stuff like that. And like, I can tell that it really affected her, but she never like let me see it. And so when I was reading your poems about cancer, Nicole, like that really touched me. Yeah. So wow. Okay. Getting a little emotional.
I mean, it's weighted, right? It is a big deal, and yet also it's so personal too. So like everyone's cancer is their own. Like that's the thing you learn when you're in the cancer world. It's yours. Like your tumor can't be replicated by anybody else's tumor. Like it's sort of strangely grown out of you, which is so bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, well, back to the discussion. Nicole, I know that you had a question for Soledad.
So one thing, and I just want to say this process, getting to read, we really enjoyed reading each other's books with the idea that we were reading each other's books, thinking about our own books at the same time. And I've never had that experience. And it really changed me as a reader and was really powerful. And one thing that I noticed, and Soledad and I had talked about this, we actually met on our own to talk about things too. So was both of our work deals heavily with place. Both of these books, that's another thread. Imagined and geographical, places we leave to return to or imagine. Both books, I think, really grapple with geography and being transplanted. Me as a person who moved to Alaska in my 20s and then have been here ever since. And your family immigrating when you were younger. And as we read each other's books, we started to really think about the complexities of this thread. And Soledad, I'd like to hear you discuss this thread in your own work and connected to what you saw and recognized in each other's, because that was a really fruitful vein for us. Like, wow, I didn't think my experience was similar to another experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the sort of regular normal narrative is like, you know, you leave your immigrant place, your home, whatever home is, and you sort of come somewhere else for all kinds of reasons, whether it's, you know, opportunity or you're fleeing or exile, right? And you know, that it's sort of, especially if you're a kid but have cognition, you kind of realize the duality, right? And so I think that for me, right, geography was really important in my book, like actual places. So the Midwest and Oklahoma, right? Now, I did not know this as a child, right? The kind of weightedness of like Oklahoma in the history of the United States, right? You sort of only learn that as you are an adult. But it's a sort of, so I think like I have the poem like An Immigrant Confession, where I grapple, right, with the actual history of being both a settler immigrant in a space that has been already colonized, and yet I have no knowledge of it, and yet it's my own kind of space of comfort, but also of transition and struggle, right? And so that's, but the Oklahoma there is sort of doing a lot of work, right? And so, and then there's the imagined. I think about like my imagining like my grandmother's home, or imagining her garden, right? Or imagining those other places. And that it's really for me about memory in that moment. And Nicole, I think you were also thinking about this kind of expansive, like traveling west, right? In that sort of like, so I was Oklahoma and you were kind of like Alaska, and it's different, right? But there is that sort of, it's kind of the strange narrative of westward movement, which I think was really unexpected. And so your poems at the end where you're struggling, you know, and dealing with the kind of uber poet, right, of sort of Alaska. And we talked about that, right? The sort of insularity of, I didn't know who John Haynes was, but like, so he's sort of a specter for some people, but not for other people. And that also signals, right, kind of the geography in a way. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and that kind of idea of being a settler in Alaska, you feel it. Alaska really, and Alaska literature has a lot of built-in settler colonialism in it. And my first book does too. And it's something that I was grappling with as a writer. Like, how does that book question? Does it question enough? I don't know if it does. I'm, you know, working through all this and thinking about this book and thinking about the way we think about landscape, nature, and individual here. And so when I started writing some of the pieces in the third section, which is called They All Came Before You, I actually described it one night as I was staying up really late writing, like arguing with John Haynes in my head. And I started, you know, and it was after I did a residency at Denali National Park. So I went and I was in this cabin by myself, which isn't that uncommon for an Alaskan, like it sounds all romantic, but I was just, you know, feeding the wood stove like I normally would at home. And so I was enjoying this winter residency, but started thinking deeply, and I was rereading Wordsworth and getting angry. And I was rereading Haynes and getting angry. And I was thinking, no, your philosophy is off. And so I started the argument, and that's kind of that same thing. So that landscape. And I feel like in Alaska, you know, the Discovery Channel is basing an entire business off of the romanticization and ridiculousness of Alaska, like this ridiculous fake Alaska they have. So it's easy for us to fall into it in literature, and I wanted to argue back. And it was interesting to see both of us grappling with that idea of being settler colonialism and arrival, and how we look at place and what that means. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think it also, right, like, I think about the strength that we talk about, the triumphalism of like surviving cancer and moving, like the triumphalism of the immigrant is supposed to be like, you triumph by arriving to the United States, and then you kind of are assimilated and all is well, and aren't you grateful, right? And it's kind of like, not all the time, right? And not when you have the ghosts that you're still sort of contending with. And I think that is also something that your work is thinking about in terms of Alaska, Nicole.
And in the idea of that homesteader in the wilderness, as if wilderness exists as empty land, which I don't think it does. You know, this homesteader comes and triumphs and sees himself as his true self only by cutting himself off from everything. Yeah. And I kind of have a problem with that. You know, like that's what I came to in the end. I'm like, I don't know, wait a minute. I don't think that's healthy. Like, you know, in a very understated way there. But yeah, so it's interesting how you just start to question it after a while. Yeah.
That's so interesting. So I have time for like one more question. I think I'm just going to do, because Nicole, you talked about John Haynes, and you're writing about him just now. So I think I will go to Soledad's final question, which is a specific one about a series of poems that make up memory spaces. And you refer to it as a pecha kucha. And I couldn't stop thinking about these poems. For those at home, the first two lines are, even love finds room in the dark lead box. It rises slowly. And it only gets better from there. Can you tell us a bit about these poems and how they came about?
Yeah, I love so I apparently like the pecha kucha. So it comes out of this presentation style. You do like 3-second presentations, and you do 20 slides about like your idea. You have 6 minutes, right? It kind of comes from like that business or that kind of model, right? And then Terrence Hayes has wonderful sequence of pecha kucha poem in relation to works of art, specifically installations. And so I was in a workshop, and this was a form, and so we were given these kind of pictures, and I realized that what I love about the sort of 20 sequences is you don't have to worry about saying everything. It's about breathing through it, right? And so in a way, it's kind of like great practice for building the arc of a whole collection. Because just like you're building the arc of the 20 sort of sequences, you are then also thinking about the arc of like a broader collection. So I responded to 20 different installation art, and mostly installation art from a really important Latin American artist. And it ended up being, for me, because her work evoked what I was reading about, which is about the coup and about kind of what it might have been like to be in that space. And even though I was in that space, I was a kid and had like no idea. So it was actually an exercise in trying to think through a moment of history, and I thought of them as window panes that you could just sort of like think about individually. So if you look like at a stained glass window, you can do it individually, or you can look at like the whole window. And that was sort of what was the inspiration, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely, it worked. Because each one was such a vivid picture. And I looked up, because I hadn't really come across many pecha kuchas before, and so I looked up what it was, and I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. So it's kind of like ekphrastic in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it works in ekphrastic work, and that's where how Terrence Hayes uses it. I have another one in the next sort of draft too. It ends up I'm long-winded, and it ends up being like this great structure that seems super intentional, and like look at how I'm sort of moving together.
I love that.
This goes along with my idea about sequences, so I feel very affirmed. Like the sequence is moving you forward in your writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was amazing. I loved this conversation. You both are just so easy to talk to. And I was so excited to kind of explore your thought processes and all of that stuff. And I'm also super glad to know that you two got along so well and that you had such a great time kind of talking to each other. And
I'm already going to Alaska, so there's definitely no question.
Amazing. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to bring Toby back up to close us out. But the both of you, this was amazing. And thank you so much. And congratulations on your new collections. And we'll drop a purchase link for them in just a second.
Hello, everyone. That was fantastic. Great job, Monica, and everyone. That was riveting conversation and readings. Loved it. So to all of you, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Don't forget, if you purchase a copy of I Was a Belle or Everything Never Comes Your Way, by Friday, you'll get a bonus book in your package. Buy a book, get a book. Get your copies now, dropping that link. Our next Hen House event will be on September 22nd at 4 o'clock Pacific time, featuring Jay Viner, author of Jane of Battery Park, and Lily Huang, author of Underneath. See you then.
See you then. Bye.